Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so that you never miss any video lesson from Rao's IAS Study Circle.
Hello everybody, welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we shall be analyzing the Hindu newspaper dated 1st of December 2020 of the New Delhi edition. The topics to be discussed today has been presented on your screen. Timestamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. Now today's news analysis shall be covered in two parts, wherein the first two articles shall be discussed by me, whereas the remaining three articles shall be discussed by Naweed sir. Now before going to today's news analysis, please test yourself to these questions. The answers to these questions shall be provided at the end of the discussion. This particular article appears on page number 7 and is titled as The State of Corruption. According to this particular article, recently, the global NGO known as the Transparency International had carried out a survey across all the Asian countries to understand the extent of corruption. Now, according to Transparency International, the highest level of corruption among all the Asian countries is actually in India. Now, the article that we are going to discuss here shall be important both from the perspective of GS Paper 2, Polity and Governance, as well as GS Paper 4, that is Ethics and Integrity. Based upon our video analysis, a main question for the practice here could be: corruption in India has become high returns, zero risk activity. In this context, discuss various initiatives to be taken by the government in order to put an end to this growing menace. Now the word corruption, it is derived from a Latin word which means to break or to destroy. On the other hand, ethics, the word ethics is also derived from a Latin word which means to say that it is arising from habit. Unfortunately, in case of India, corruption has become a matter of habit. The growing corruption in India, it is an important manifestation of the failure of ethics, and this can be attributed to the declining human values which focuses more on accumulation of wealth rather than on the mode adopted to accumulate the wealth. This can also be attributed to the lack of strong ethical, legal, institutional and social framework in India. Now, the second Administrative Reforms Commission in its report on ethics in governance has highlighted that corruption can be mathematically represented as monopoly plus discretion minus accountability. So whenever we have a government's monopoly accompanied by the discretion of the ministers plus the civil servants, and whenever we do not have any kind of accountability, it normally leads to the growth of corruption. So what strategies should the government adopt in order to fight the corruption and improve the ethics in governance? These strategies can broadly be defined in terms of improving the ethical framework, improving the legal framework, improving the institutional framework, and transforming the social framework to deal with the corruption. Now coming to the ethical framework, the second Administrative Reforms Commission in its report on ethics in governance has highlighted that the public officials such as ministers, legislators and civil servants need to work on the principle of the public trust doctrine. According to public trust doctrine, they are required to take decisions based in the best interest of the public rather than taking decisions based upon their own selfish interest. Accordingly, we need to provide for an ethical framework for the ministers, legislators and civil servants. So what should be the broad contours of such ethical framework? First and foremost, as part of such an ethical framework, we must codify as to what ethical norms and practices they should follow. We should enforce these codified norms. We should provide for a disclosure of personal interest in order to avoid conflict of interest. And if they violate the ethical norms and practices, we should provide for their disqualification. So the overall idea behind the adoption of such an ethical framework is to reduce the discretionary powers of the public officials and increase their overall accountability. Take for instance, a district collector wants to award a tender to a private sector company for the construction of a road in a particular district. Now it may so happen that a friend of such a district collector also runs a company which is involved in the construction of roads. His company may also apply for such a tender. Now, the district collector in this particular case would see a clear conflict of interest. His personal interest may be to award the project to his friend's company. On the other hand, the public interest here could be to award the tender to a company that has bid for the lowest amount. So such kind of ethical dilemmas keep on arising before the public officials. Accordingly, in order to handle such ethical dilemmas, we need to provide for a strong ethical framework. So as far as the ethical framework for the ministers is concerned, presently we have only code of conduct for the ministers and we do not have a separate code of ethics. Accordingly, there is a need to have a separate code of ethics for the ministers. Such code of ethics for the ministers should be based upon the 7 principles as enunciated by the Nolan Committee in UK. These 7 principles are selflessness, honesty, accountability, integrity, leadership, objectivity, and openness. So once these ethical norms and practices are laid down, these ethical norms and practices need to be enforced by setting up of a separate cell in the Prime Minister's office. The Prime Minister should be duty bound to ensure the observance of the code of ethics by the ministers. Apart from that, the Prime Minister's office should also submit an annual report to the Parliament on the observance of the code of ethics by the ministers. So if any minister has violated these ethical norms and practices, such violation should be brought before the Parliament of India. Secondly, as far as the ethical framework for the legislators is concerned, presently in order to ensure the ethical behavior by the legislators, we do have the Ethics Committee of the Parliament. Now the second ARC has highlighted that in order to assist this Ethics Committee of the Parliament, there is a need to set up the Office of the Ethics Commissioner. The Office of the Ethics Commissioner has to function under the presiding officer of the House, that is the Speaker in the case of Lok Sabha and Chairperson in the case of the Rajya Sabha. And this particular office would ensure that the ethical norms and practices that we have laid down for the legislators, these ethical norms and practices are actually followed by them. And whenever there are any cases of violation, the Office of Ethics Commissioner will bring forth such kind of violations before the Ethics Committee. And lastly, just like how we have the Code of Ethics for the ministers, there is a need to have a Code of Ethics for the civil servants as well. Now coming to the legal framework. Now the legal framework to fight the corruption in case of India is the Prevention of Corruption Act 1988. Now there are a number of problems or flaws in the Prevention of Corruption Act which in turn has led to the growing instances of corruption. So if we have to fight the corruption, we would have to strengthen the legal framework. That is, we would have to strengthen the Prevention of Corruption Act 1988. First and foremost, if you look at the word corruption, corruption is not just confined to bribery. Corruption is much more broader. Take for instance, the corruption may include the abuse of authority to harm or favor someone. Now in the example that we have discussed here, the district collector may decide to award this particular road construction project to his friend's company, even though there could be another company that is willing to construct this particular road at a much lower price. So clearly in this particular case, the district collector may not be getting any money from his friend. But here the district collector is actually misusing his authority. Similarly, the public officials may also obstruct the justice. Now take for instance, the district collector may direct the police not to arrest any of his relatives who may be involved in certain criminal activities. Similarly, a minister as such may spend crores of rupees in renovating his office building or in renovating his house, which in a way he is actually wasting the public money. Similarly, the corruption can also include not following the ideals laid down by the Indian Constitution, such as not protecting the fundamental rights of the Indian citizens, promotion of hatredness among different religious communities, discriminating one community against another, and so on. So, accordingly, the second ARC has highlighted that there is a need to widen the definition of corruption to include all of these aspects as well. Secondly, see, when we say corruption, corruption can be of two types. That is the coercive corruption and the collusive corruption. Coercive corruption is when the public officials demand money from the public in order to get their work done. Say for instance, if a person is required to pay bribe in order to get his motor driving license, PDS card, etc., it can be considered as a coercive corruption. Collusive corruption basically takes place because of the collusion or the nexus between the politicians, bureaucrats, and the corporate entities. So let's say a particular corporate entity wants to get an award for a government tender project. So the corporate entity can pay a bribe to both the politicians as well as bureaucrats and get the project. So this is a collusive corruption. So we can say that the coercive corruption is a retail corruption that normally takes place at the lower level, whereas a collusive corruption is a grand corruption that takes place at the highest level and it involves huge amount of money. Now presently the Prevention of Corruption Act fails to make a distinction between what constitutes the coercive corruption and what constitutes the collusive corruption. Accordingly, since collusive corruption involves huge amount of corruption in comparison to coercive corruption, the second ARC has recommended that there is a need to provide for a special offence of the collusive bribery under the Prevention of Corruption Act 1988. Since it involves huge amount of money, we need to provide for a stricter punishment for the collusive corruption in comparison to the coercive corruption. Next is the need to strengthen the sanction for prosecution. So what exactly is this sanction for prosecution and why it has to be strengthened? See, the honest civil servants, they normally take decisions in a bona fide manner. That is, they normally take decisions keeping in mind the larger public interest. However, not always their decisions may be successful. Sometimes their decisions may also lead to failure. Later, when their decisions lead to failure, their decisions as such may be construed as an act of corruption by the Chief Vigilance Commissioner, the CBI, etc. So, because of the decisions which they have taken in a bona fide manner, these honest civil servants can be charged under the acts of corruption under the POCA. So, if we keep charging the honest civil servants for the bad decisions which they have taken, this may in turn prevent them from bringing innovations in the administration, and this may promote status quo. Hence, in order to promote innovative decision making by the civil servants, we do have the sanction for prosecution under the Prevention of Corruption Act 1988. Under the sanction for prosecution, if a charge of corruption has to be initiated against a civil servant, the prior permission has to be taken up from his immediate authority. So if you look at the intention behind the sanction for prosecution, the main intention is to promote innovation and to protect the honest civil servants. Now, in spite of its good intention, the sanction for prosecution has been misused. Normally, in case of India, we have seen that even the immediate superiors are also involved in the acts of corruption. So when this civil servant is required to be charged for the acts of corruption, prior permission has to be taken from the immediate superior. So since the immediate superior is also involved in corruption, he will not give the permission to proceed with the sanction. So because of this nexus, there is huge delay in proceeding with the corruption cases with the civil servants. So in order to address this particular problem that has arisen with the sanction for prosecution, the second ARC has highlighted that we need to transfer the sanctioning power to the empowered committee, which should be headed by the Chief Vigilance Commissioner. We should provide for a definite timeline for giving the prior sanction for the prosecution, and in some of the cases, prior sanction for the prosecution may not be needed. Now, for example, if the public officials are caught red-handed accepting the bribery, then there should be no need for giving the prior approval for the sanction for the prosecution. The next recommendation of the second ARC is to repeal Article 311 of the Indian Constitution. See, Article 311 of the Indian Constitution provides that the civil servants cannot be removed by an authority subordinate to that by which he or she is appointed. Article 311 in a way provides a security of tenure to the civil servants. So once a person joins the civil services, he or she continues to serve in the civil services till their retirement. Undoubtedly, the security of tenure is quite important for the civil servants. But at the same time, Article 311 is considered to be one of the biggest hindrances before the government in removing the corrupt officials. So if a government official is found to be corrupt, then the government finds it extremely difficult to remove such corrupt officers because of the protection which they enjoy under Article 311. Accordingly, the second ARC has highlighted that there is a need to repeal Article 311 of the Indian Constitution. Nextly, adequate amount of protection should be given to the whistleblowers who could be able to highlight the instances of corruption in the government officials. Nextly, whenever the civil servants are involved in the acts of corruption, whatever loss is caused to the public exchequer because of such corruption by the civil servants should be liable to pay for such damages. Nextly, the Prevention of Corruption Act should also include various private sector entities that provides various kinds of public utility services. Now this becomes quite important because in the recent times we have been focusing on the public-private partnership. So we have been relying on the private sector to provide various kind of public utility services, and accordingly the private sector should also be brought within the ambit of the Prevention of Corruption Act. Lastly, even those NGOs which receive substantial amount of funding from the government of India should also be brought under the ambit of the POCA, that is Prevention of Corruption Act. Now coming to the institutional framework, as you all must be aware, the Parliament of India has enacted the Lokpal and Lokayuktas Act 2013 in order to set up the Lokpal at the central level and the Lokayuktas at the state level. The main role of the Lokpal is to inquire and investigate into the allegations of corruptions against the public officials. Now the various aspects of the Lokpal which become quite important from the perspective of the UPSC examination, they have been incorporated in the PDF for your reference. Now whenever the Lokpal receives the complaints of corruption, the Lokpal can either investigate the cases of corruption on its own, or it can ask any other investigative agency such as CVC, CBI, etc. to investigate such corruption related cases. Once the investigation is completed, the prosecution wing of the Lokpal will be required to take up the case of corruption before the appropriate court. Now, according to a Hindu newspaper article that appeared in February 2020, Lokpal is yet to set up the enquiry wing and the prosecution wing in order to handle the various instances of corruption. Accordingly, this particular article has highlighted that in spite of 6 years, Lokpal even today is a non-starter. So we need to strengthen the Lokpal in order to handle the cases of corruption. So the office of CVC has been facing issues such as the delay in cases, low conviction rates and so on. This needs to be addressed. Then nextly, as you all must be aware, the Central Bureau of Investigation does not enjoy sufficient level of autonomy. It is normally under the government's control. So whenever it is investigating into cases of corruption, there is huge amount of political interference. So accordingly, we need to provide the necessary autonomy to the CBI. First and foremost, the CBI as of now, it is a non-statutory body which has been set up under the Delhi Special Police Establishment Act. So we need to come out with a separate CBI Act in order to give the statutory status to the Central Bureau of Investigation. The CBI needs to have its own dedicated cadre of professionals to investigate the cases of corruption, and CBI as such should be directly accountable to the Parliament instead of the government in order to make it more effective. And lastly, the second ARC has also recommended that we need to set up an ombudsman at the local level, that is basically to inquire into allegations of corruption at the level of Panchayati Raj institutions as well as the urban local bodies. Now coming to the social framework. Now social framework basically highlights that by engaging with the non-governmental organizations, civil society organizations, people, etc., we would be able to check the corruption. This becomes quite important because it is usually the people who are considered to be the worst victims of the corruption. So if you rope in the people, then automatically we would be able to check the corruption at the grassroots level. One of the best examples as to how people can be engaged to check corruption is that of the Independent Commission Against the Corruption in Hong Kong. Now this engages with the common public and tries to root out the corruption. Similarly, in case of India, we have the best example of the Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sangathan in Rajasthan. Now this particular civil society organization played a very important role in getting the Right to Information Act passed in India. And we do know as to how the Right to Information Act has brought in the culture of transparency, accountability, and promoted good governance in India. So, all of this is attributed to the civil society organization. Similarly, we do have the Public Affairs Center in Bangalore that carries out the report card surveys. Now, these surveys carried out by the Public Affairs Center basically measure the performance of the government in terms of the services which they provide to the public, the services such as water supply, sanitation, electricity distribution, and so on. So, this in a way promotes greater accountability of the government officials. Nextly, the NGOs and civil society organizations can also use the public interest litigations or the PILs in order to expose the cases of corruption. We need to strengthen the implementation of the citizen charters. We need to carry out the social audit of all the government schemes and programs to check the corruption. And lastly, as recommended by second ARC, we need to adopt USA's False Claims Act. Under the False Claims Act in USA, the people are provided with the financial incentives whenever they expose instances of corruption. So if we adopt the False Claims Act as adopted in USA, we would be able to check corruption by involving with the public. So these are some of the important aspects which one should know with respect to this particular article. Now this particular article appears on page number 6 and is titled as The Perils of the Deregulated Imperfect Agricultural Markets. This article shall be important from the perspective of GS Paper 3 Indian Economy under the subsection Agricultural Marketing in India. As you can see, in previous year mains, a number of questions have been asked with respect to the agricultural marketing. Hence, from the perspective of this particular article, you would be required to understand as to what are the provisions of the 3 Farm Acts recently passed by the Indian Parliament, the reasons for their opposition by multiple stakeholders, and to what extent these reasons for their opposition are justified. In a nutshell, basically, you should be in a position to carry out the critical analysis of the 3 Farm Acts passed by the Indian Parliament. Accordingly, a question that can be expected from this particular article could be, the Farm Acts passed by the Indian Parliament would be able to address the challenges of agricultural marketing, streamline the supply chains, and boost the income levels of the farmers. Critically evaluate. In a nutshell, basically you should understand the pros and cons of the recently passed the 3 Farm Acts. So before we get into the detailed discussion of this particular article, let us first look into its background. According to the Committee on Doubling of Farmers' Income, agriculture as an enterprise basically comprises of 2 sets of activities, that is, the production related activities and the post production related activities. Production basically here refers to the cultivation. See, as far as the production is concerned, Indian agriculture has made rapid strides. From a net importer of food grains, India has become the net exporter of food grains. The total marketable surplus has increased by almost 10 times since India's independence. However, the post-production related activities have not really caught up with the production related activities. Even today, the agricultural marketing in case of India continues to remain highly restrictive, fragmented, pro-trader and anti-farmers. In fact, according to the Committee on Doubling of Farmers' Income, the poor agricultural marketing is considered to be one of the biggest hindrances to the doubling of the farmers' income. Keeping in mind these problems related to the agricultural marketing, the Indian Parliament has recently passed the 3 Farm Acts. These 3 Farm Acts basically seeks to bring about the reforms in the agricultural marketing. Now, if you look at any industry in case of India, the industries have been given complete freedom as well as autonomy in selling their industrial goods. They can sell their industrial goods anywhere within India. They can export the industrial goods, and there are no restrictions on the industries as to whom they can sell the industrial goods. However, the freedom that the industries enjoy, these freedoms are not given to the farmers in case of India. Hence, in a way, according to the economists, the passage of these 3 Farm Acts in order to liberalize the Indian agriculture marketing, it is considered to be a 1991 movement of the Indian agriculture. However, as you all must be aware, different stakeholders are opposing these three farm acts. Take for instance the farmers. The farmers are apprehensive that these three farm acts will ultimately lead to the discontinuation of the MSP regime. They are also concerned that going forward they could be exploited by the multinational companies, wherein these multinational companies, they may pay them a price which is much below the minimum support price. As far as traders are concerned, the traders are apprehensive that this could lead to dismantling of APMCs and ultimately they would lose the political influence. As far as the states are concerned, see, agriculture as a subject, it is placed under the state list, which means it is a state legislature that can make the law related to the agricultural marketing. So when the parliament has passed these three farm acts, the state government in turn believe that the center has encroached upon the legislative powers of the states. Hence, the states believe that it is a challenge to the federalism. Some of the states are also concerned that these three farm acts would ultimately lead to the loss of the revenue. So keeping in mind these reasons for the opposition, we will carry out a critical analysis of two important farm acts. The first farm act is Farmers Produce Trade and Commerce Promotion and Facilitation Act, and the next farm act is the Farmers Empowerment and Protection Agreement on the Price Assurance and Farm Services Act. So we'll start with the Farmers Produce Trade and Commerce Act 2020. As you all must be aware, agriculture is a subject that has been placed under the state list. Accordingly, most of the state governments, they have come up with their own APMC acts in order to regulate the marketing of the agricultural commodities. However, the APMC regime is considered to be quite restrictive, pro-traders and anti-farmers. The APMC regime places a number of restrictions on the farmers as to whom and where he can sell the agricultural produce. A farmer has to compulsorily sell the agricultural produce only within the APMCs. A farmer has to compulsorily sell the agricultural produce only to the traders. So a farmer under the present APMC regime does not have the freedom to sell the agricultural produce outside the APMCs. He does not have the freedom to sell the agricultural produce directly to an exporter, trader or a consumer. Hence, in order to liberalize the agricultural marketing, this particular act basically seeks to provide the freedom to the farmers to sell their agricultural produce whomsoever and wherever they would want to. Under this particular act, the farmers can sell their agricultural produce outside the APMCs in the trade area. Now, the trade area as defined under this particular act include the farm gate, factory premises, warehouses, cold chain infrastructure and so on. So a farmer can now sell his agricultural produce directly to a processor, exporter, trader or a consumer. Under the present APMC regime, if someone has to buy the agricultural produce from the farmers, the traders must compulsorily have a trading license. However, this requirement has been done away with under this particular act, wherein now the requirement to buy the agricultural produce from the farmer is to have a PAN card and there is no need to have the trading license. Apart from that, whenever the farmers sell their agricultural produce in the APMCs, multiple fees are required to be paid. Some of these fees include the APMC cess, market development fee and so on. Under this particular act, no fee would be imposed when a farmer sells his agricultural produce outside the APMCs in the trade area. See, when we give the freedom to a farmer to sell the produce directly to a processor, exporter or a consumer, disputes are bound to arise. Accordingly, this particular act provides to set up a dispute resolution mechanism by the subdivisional magistrate at the district level. The subdivisional magistrate is required to set up the conciliation board in order to handle the disputes that may arise between the farmers and the traders. Now, presently there is a sense of misconception among certain sections of the society that we have done away with the APMCs completely. This is not true. Rather, now a farmer would have basically two choices. He can either go and sell the agricultural produce within the APMCs which are controlled by the state government, or he can go and sell the agricultural produce in the trade area which is as defined under this particular act passed by the Indian Parliament. So now this particular act basically provides more freedom or more choices to the farmers as to where and to whom he can sell the agricultural produce. By offering the choices to the farmers, we are trying to ensure that the farmers get the right and remunerative prices for their agricultural produce. So in a way, the new Farm Act tend to democratize and liberalize the agricultural marketing regime in India. Now the reforms introduced by the government of India is indeed considered to be a game changer. It looks extremely good on the paper. But the question is this reform alone sufficient to double the income levels of the farmers? That is, by giving the freedom to the farmers, would we be able to increase their income levels? Now, in order to find the answer to this particular question, our analysis should be based upon certain empirical evidence. Empirical evidence here means we must arrive at a conclusion based upon some of the states that have decided to do away with the APMC regime and have given the freedom to the farmers to sell their agricultural produce wherever and whomsoever they would want to. Take for instance the Bihar government. The Bihar government took a very bold decision to do away with the APMC regime way back in the year 2006. So almost 14 years have been passed wherein in Bihar the farmers have been given the complete freedom to sell their agricultural produce anywhere within India. So based upon how this particular model or this freedom given to the farmer has worked, we can then arrive at a conclusion as to whether the recently passed Farm Act, whether will it work or not. Now, according to a study that is conducted by the National Council for the Applied Economic Research in the year 2019, there is no significant improvement in the prices received by the farmers in spite of the repeal of the APMC Act in Bihar. This is so because the markets are located away from the villages, because of which almost around 90% of the crops are sold within the villages itself to the traders at a price which is much below the minimum support price. So the Bihar's model tells us that if this Farm Act has to work, then we would have to increase the density of the agricultural markets. Secondly, the Bihar government believed that more amount of private sector investment would take place in the agricultural marketing. However, the private sector was not so enthusiastic in setting up of the private market yards. And thirdly, since the Bihar government did away with the APMC Act completely, this in turn led to the loss of revenue to the Bihar government. This revenue otherwise could have been used to improve the infrastructure of the existing APMCs, streamline the agriculture supply chain, and this could have actually boosted the income levels of the. So based upon this study carried out by the National Council for the Applied Economic Research, we can easily come to a conclusion that giving the freedom to the farmers alone would not be sufficient to enhance the income levels of the farmers. This in turn has to be accompanied by other important measures as well. So based upon the empirical evidence, as we have seen in case of Bihar, some of the challenges that may arise with respect to this particular act include lower impact on the income levels of the farmers, loss of revenue to the states, a possible exploitation by the private sector. The low marketable surplus by the small and marginal farmers may in turn force them to sell their agricultural produce within the villages itself to the traders at a price which is much below the minimum support price. Then the concern of the poor density of agricultural markets. Now, according to the National Commission on Farmers, which was headed by MS Swaminathan, an average APMC should be able to serve an area of 80 square kilometer and an APMC should be available within a radius of 5 km. However, in case of India, an average APMC serves an area of almost around 450 square kilometer. See, locating the agricultural markets closer to the villages is quite important because this will in turn enable the farmers to reduce their transportation cost. If the APMCs are located away from the villages, then the farmers, in order to reduce the transportation cost, they may be forced to sell their agricultural produce at a price which is much below the minimum support price within the villages itself. So we have to ensure that the recently passed Farm Act does not remain a mere paper tiger. It has to act as a game changer. So what strategies are required to be followed? See, first and foremost, some of the economists have highlighted that in order to address the concerns raised by the farmers that they could be exploited by the private sector entities, this particular act has to be amended. Under this particular act, we have to introduce a provision that if a farmer is selling his agriculture produce in a trade area directly to a processor, exporter, or a trader, the price paid to the farmer should compulsorily be higher than the minimum support price. Secondly, we would have to increase the marketing density in line with the recommendations of the National Commission of Farmers headed by MS Swaminathan. Thirdly, as highlighted before, we have set up a dispute resolution mechanism in the form of the conciliation board. So going forward, as we start implementing this particular act, the number of disputes between the farmers and the traders are bound to arise. So we need to strengthen the dispute resolution mechanism and protect the interest of the farmers. Nextly, we must link all the agricultural markets with the ENAM. In fact, the trade area, that is the factory premises, warehouses, cold chain infrastructure, etc. All of these markets or the trade area should also be linked with the ENAM so that the farmer has the necessary freedom to sell their agriculture produce anywhere across India. And lastly, as highlighted before, agriculture is a subject placed under the state list. However, in order to formulate this particular act, the Parliament has invoked entry 33 of the concurrent list. The entry 33 of the concurrent list provides for the regulation in trade and commerce of certain commodities, including the agricultural commodities. So, the Union government has passed this particular act by invoking entry 33 in the concurrent list. Please note that this particular entry 33 was not originally included in the Indian Constitution, but it was added to the first amendment to the Indian Constitution. On the other hand, some of the state governments believe that agriculture is a subject placed under the state list and hence they alone have a power to make a law in order to regulate the marketing of the agricultural produce. So clearly there is a tussle between the center and the states as to who can make the law related to the marketing of the agricultural produce. Accordingly, a number of petitions have been filed before the Supreme Court with respect to the passage of these farm acts. Apart from that, some of the state governments, such as the state government of Punjab, the state government of Rajasthan, these states have passed their own farm acts in order to nullify the central farm bills. So the matter as to whether the center can make a law related to marketing of agricultural produce or not is presently sub judice and it is pending before the Supreme Court of India. In this regard, we need to provide for a clear-cut and definite role to the center as far as agriculture marketing is concerned. Accordingly, based upon the recommendations of the National Commission on Farmers as well as the Committee on Doubling of Farmers' Income, we need to place the agricultural marketing under the concurrent list. By placing the agriculture marketing under the concurrent list, we would be able to give role to both the center as well as states in regulating the marketing of agricultural produce. Lastly, if you look at European Union, the European Union consists of more than 25 countries. These countries have come together and created an integrated domestic market for the benefit of their farmers as well as industries. So taking a cue from the European Union, even the states in case of India have to come together in the spirit of cooperative federalism and promote integrated domestic market for the benefit of farmers in India. The next act is Farmers Empowerment and Protection Agreement on Price Assurances and Farm Services Act 2020. This particular act basically seeks to promote and regulate the contract farming. Contract farming, as you know, it is a kind of agreement signed between the farmers and an entity such as a food processing industry, exporter, processor, etc. Under this agreement, the entity decides to provide for all the necessary inputs to the farmers such as seeds, fertilizers, insecticides, technology, etc. And in return, the farmers decide to sell their agricultural produce to the farmers at a price that is fixed as per the contract. So this agreement seeks to provide a guaranteed prices to the farmers. It brings the farmers in direct contact with the processors, exporters, and so on. So, by doing so, it eliminates all the middlemen and the intermediaries which the farmers normally encounters in the APMCs. Apart from that, issues are bound to arise between the corporate entities and the farmers whenever they enter into contract farming. Hence, in order to handle such disputes, this act provides for a dispute resolution mechanism. Now, the dispute resolution mechanism under this particular act is similar to the dispute resolution mechanism which we discussed in the previous act. See, as far as the benefits are concerned, it will be able to streamline the agriculture supply chain. It will be able to give a push to the food processing industries. It will be able to provide the necessary agricultural inputs to the farmers. It promotes long-term investment in the Indian agriculture. And by eliminating the middlemen and the intermediaries, it will be able to provide fair and remunerative prices to the farmers. But at the same time, a number of concerns have been raised with respect to the promotion of the contract farming in India. See, the small and marginal farmers, they account for almost around 83% of the farming community. And the land owned by the small and marginal farmers is highly fragmented in nature. So the fragmented land holdings would in turn disincentivize the large corporate entities to enter into contractual agreement with the small and marginal farmers. The large corporate entities such as PepsiCo, they may enter into contractual agreement only with the large landholders who are considered to be quite rich. So the contractual farming in case of India can be exclusionary. It can exclude the small and marginal farmers and thus promote inequalities within the farmers. The second concern which has been raised by the farmers is with respect to their exploitation. See, there are basically two types of markets. One is the monopolistic market and the second one is monopsonistic market. When we say monopolistic market, in the monopolistic market we have a single seller. Whereas in case of the monopsony market, we have a single buyer. So when we promote contract farming, it can so happen that in a specific region or a state of India, there could emerge a single buyer such as PepsiCo. So when we have a single buyer and a large number of seller farmers, this single buyer such as PepsiCo would have a larger bargaining power over the farmers. This in turn can lead to their exploitation. Some of the environmentalists have also raised concerns that the contract farming would have an adverse impact on the environment, wherein it can lead to the promotion of the monoculture farming, wherein the corporate entities can force the farmers to grow only certain types of crops. Similarly, the corporate entities, in order to make more amount of profits, they may promote higher utilization of fertilizers, waters, insecticides, etc., which in the long run would have an adverse impact on the soils as well as the local environment. So these are some of the concerns which have been raised with respect to contract farming. So as far as the exam is concerned, you should basically know the pros and cons of the farm acts and what strategies should the government follow in order to address the challenges that may arise upon the implementation of these farm acts. See, as far as the contract farming is concerned, in our discussion, I have basically highlighted the pros and cons. I have not highlighted as to what strategies are required to be followed to address these challenges that may arise upon the implementation of the contract farming. So please do let us know as to what strategies should the government follow in order to address the challenges that may arise upon the implementation of the contract farming in the comment section given below. With this, let us now take up the next article.
The next news to be discussed appears as an article on page number 7. It says, "Is a person's address public information?" Further, it highlights that only information bearing a nexus to public activity should be available to the public. So, this article basically discusses or describes about the fact that whether RTI applicant while submitting an RTI application to the PIO needs to disclose their home address. First of all, why do they need to disclose their home address? That is there any law or any provision under the RTI Act for such disclosure? And if no, then why not? Along with the reasons. And also the fact whether the term home address of an RTI applicant comes within the purview of personal information. So, in this regard, let us discuss these aspects with respect to personal information, its relation to home address, and whether home address has any nexus to public activity. Further, this article also mentions about two important judgments of Bombay High Court as well as Calcutta High Court, whereby the Bombay High Court did not allow disclosure of home address of the RTI applicant, relying on a similar judgment of Calcutta High Court of 2013. So, in this regard, let us understand all these details with respect to this article appearing on page number 7. Now, this article becomes important from the perspective of your mains examination as it gets covered under GS paper 2 as well as GS paper 4. And in the prelims, question can also be asked on RTI under Polity and Governance. So, discussing the two judgments, Mr. Saket Gokhale, who is an RTI activist, received threat calls near his house, and the mob chanted slogans, and this increased threat to his life because of his activism against ruling party. Now, since Mr. Saket Gokhale had provided his residential details in the RTI application, that is his residential address, so a part of the mob gathered around his house and chanted slogans against him, and this overall increased threat to his life because of his activism against the ruling party. So, in this regard, the Bombay High Court ordered the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting to remove contact details of Mr. Saket Gokhale, citing threats to his life. And this judgment of Bombay High Court was relied on a similar judgment of Calcutta High Court in the case of Mr. Abhishek Goenka versus Ashish Kumar Roy. Now, with respect to this particular judgment of Calcutta High Court, Mr. Goenka, who is also an RTI activist, wanted to give PO box number or post office box number as his residential address or as his contact details while filing RTI application, so that Mr. Goenka does not have to disclose his home address in order to protect himself from possible reprisals. However, in this case also, the RTI authority insisted on having the residential address of Mr. Goenka. However, the Calcutta High Court ruled in favor of Mr. Goenka and said that RTI Act does not require information seeker to provide personal details except those required to contact the RTI applicant. So, in this regard, this aspect of this particular judgment becomes important. So, let us go through the provision with respect to RTI Act, which mentions that it does not require information seeker to provide personal details except those required to contact him or her. Now, as you can see, Section 6 of RTI Act mentions about request for obtaining information. And Section 6 Clause 2 specifically highlights that an applicant making request for information shall not be required to give any reason for requesting the information or any other personal details except those that may be necessary for contacting him. So, going through this provision of Section 6 Clause 2, it becomes very clear that the RTI Act does not say that the RTI applicant have to provide for any personal details except those that may be necessary for contacting them. So, it is in this regard the Calcutta High Court ruled in favor of Mr. Goenka and also permitted authorities to disallow post office box number details and only allowed the public information officer to ask for personal details where they faced difficulty to contact such RTI applicant. As non-disclosure of residential address in a way protected the RTI activist from possible harm or from possible threat to their life. Further, the Calcutta High Court judgment also laid out a condition for the government. It held that personal details of RTI applicants should also be hidden by the government from public disclosure in order to prevent harassment of RTI activists. And it is this part of this Calcutta judgment which was relied heavily by the Bombay High Court judgment in the case of Mr. Saket Gokhale. So, overall, both these judgments highlight the fact that not disclosing residential address as contact details by the RTI applicants is allowed, as disclosing of such details might increase threat to the life of such RTI activists. However, in this particular article, the author does not abide by the reasons provided in this judgment. Because according to the author, there are various public documents or government identity card where contact details have been disclosed on government websites. So in this regard, let us go through this viewpoint of the author and also try to understand that how these details also helps to improve efficiency in governance and also improve transparency. So, regarding the disclosure of personal details, such personal details must be attributed or must have a link or must be related to any public activity or to any public interest. And this part has been mentioned in section 81J of RTI Act. So, in this regard, first of all, let us go through section 81J of RTI Act. So overall, Section 8 of RTI Act provides for exemption from disclosure of certain informations. And specifically Section 81J says that there shall be no obligation to give any citizens information which relates to personal information, the disclosure of which basically it means that personal information should not be disclosed unless such personal information has certain relationship to any public activity or interest, or such personal information should also not be disclosed if disclosure of such personal information would cause unwarranted invasion of privacy of the individual. So these two aspects becomes very clear, whereby the RTI Act says that disclosure of personal information of an individual is exempted unless there is a relation of disclosure of personal information to any public activity. Another provision mentioned under section 81J is that unless the Central Public Information Officer, State Public Information Officer, or the appellate authority is satisfied that the disclosure of such personal information is in the larger public interest. So, unless and until the CPIO, SPIO, or the appellate authority is satisfied that there is larger public interest in disclosing such personal information should be exempted from disclosure. Another important aspect highlighted in this provision is that any information which cannot be denied to the parliament or a state legislature shall also not be denied to any person. So this is specifically with respect to section 81J of RTI Act. Now another view expressed by the author is that he does not abide by the judgment, as he argues that even though the judgment of Bombay High Court prohibits contact details from disclosure, the same judgment contains the contact details of litigants, and this judgment is publicly available. And it is here where the article mentions that disclosure of certain personal information also becomes necessary, as certain government documents also contains these contact details which are displayed on various government websites. So in this regard, let us go through these government documents where home address is displayed on government's website. These includes the earlier provided telephone directories which was provided by the government telecom service providers, Aadhaar card, election card, land records containing details of ownership. All FIRs in cognizable cases are also displayed on the website, as it also displays the names and addresses of the complainants and also the accused. And this is as per the recent Supreme Court judgment on police reforms. Further, the address of litigants are also displayed in judgments, as mentioned earlier, which can be accessed online by anyone. And also new transparency initiatives by different state governments, like Jan Suchna portal by Rajasthan government, as it allows citizens to access information on schemes carried out by different departments of the state governments, and also allows citizens to conduct social audit based on the documents collected through the Suchna portal. So overall, the article says that there are certain benefits with respect to disclosure of the contact details of citizens. The benefit of such disclosures includes improving transparency in governance, weeding out ghost beneficiaries, especially with respect to such welfare schemes where money is transferred into the bank accounts. Disclosure of contact details further reduces corruption and leakage, especially with respect to public distribution of benefits. It helps in identifying targeted beneficiaries. It helps in displaying address of beneficiaries and also boost confidence in ensuring transparency and efficiency in implementing the government schemes. Helps in social audit of government schemes at grassroots level, especially at panchayat level, and overall helps in improving governance. So this is the view expressed by the author with respect to displaying of contact details including home address in some of the government documents. Thus, this article becomes very important not only from the perspective of GS paper 2 with respect to RTI, but also with respect to GS paper 4, and you can also use these examples if asked as a case study. So, with this, let's move on to the next news discussion. The next article to be discussed also appears on page number 7. It says Recalibrating India Nepal ties. The relationship between India and Nepal has never been free of controversy as both countries have not changed their perspectives of each other. That is, both India and Nepal view each other in a different way, which is not acceptable or adaptable for each other. So, in this regard, the article highlights that the recent visit of India's Foreign Secretary Mr. Harshvardhan Shringla to Kathmandu did not mention about the Eminent Persons Group for Nepal-India relationship. Now, here you must know about Eminent Persons Group for Nepal-India relationship as it comprises members from both India as well as Nepal. Now, this particular eminent person groups basically was formed in January 2016 and was tasked to review various agreements and treaties between India and Nepal, including the Nepal India Friendship Treaty of 1950. Now, this treaty has been a bone of contention between India Nepal ties, as according to Nepal, because of this treaty, India does not treat Nepal as an equal sovereign. So, it is here where the problem lies between India and Nepal relationship, as there is an ongoing boundary dispute between India and Nepal around the Limpiadhura as well as Kala Pani region. So it is in this regard the author in this article has mentioned about two aspects. First is that there is certain problem with respect to India providing billion of aid to Nepal, and the second aspect or the second problem highlighted by the author here is that, and the second problem which has been highlighted by the author is that India should not rely on people to people exchanges, as majority of the population of Nepal is under 35 years of age having global aspirations, and this is important because for them India is not the only location or the country where they wish to work, as there are many other countries where they can work. So it is in this regard, let us go through the problem highlighted by the author with respect to these two aspects. Now, regarding the problem with India's aid, the author highlights that in the Nepal side, this aid provided by India for decades has been seen more as a favor and less as a contribution for Nepal's planned development. More importantly, Nepal believes that India provides these aid to garner certain support. And this perspective on behalf of Nepal is not acceptable to them. So they want to see Indian aid more in the form of contribution rather than as a favor provided to an area for which India wants certain support. And this contribution must be for Nepal's planned development. Another aspect highlighted by the author is that India is also trying to compete with China in providing aid for Nepal's development. Now, here, China has outsmart India as they have picked up strategic locations for Nepal's development. And another important aspect is that Nepal is an area of strategic influence in China's Belt and Road Initiative. So it is here where China takes an upper hand with respect to providing contributions for Nepal's planned development as compared to India's favor provided in terms of aid worth billion of rupees. So after 2015 when Nepal was struck by the earthquake, China's contribution in Nepal has substantially increased, and this has also become one of the problem for India. Now the another aspect highlighted by the author is with respect to India's reliance on people to people exchanges, as was also highlighted by India's foreign secretary during his visit to Kathmandu. Now, regarding the second aspect of relying on people to people exchanges, this article mentions that nearly three-fourths of Nepal's population is under 35 years of age, having global aspirations, and as mentioned, that they do not depend only on India in terms of work. So, this is one area which India needs to understand that in times to come, there may be a scenario where young populations from Nepal would not like to work in India. Second aspect is that large section of Indians in Nepal who sends remittances back to India worth around $3 billion, and this is a substantial amount as in terms of remittances back to India Nepal ranks 8th. So any adverse relationship between India and Nepal might affect this large section of population which is dependent on remittances from Nepal. So, this is another aspect highlighted in this particular article. So, it is here where the author concludes by saying that the geography between India and Nepal cannot be changed. So, both India and Nepal needs to rework their relationship, as the reworking of relationship must start by reviewing agreements and treaties between Nepal and India, including the Nepal-India Friendship Treaty of 1950. So, effectively, both the Prime Ministers of India and Nepal must look forward to the report of the EPG, that is Eminent Persons Group, with respect to Nepal India relationship. And India must change their perspective with respect to improving relationship with Nepal, considering the reality of influence of China in Nepal. Now, this article becomes important from the perspective of bilateral relation between India and Nepal and gets covered under GS paper 2 in the mains examination, and with respect to prelims it gets covered under current events of international importance. The next news to be discussed appears on page number 4. It says, no separate flag or constitution for Nagaland, says the governor. National flag constitution are the pride of people of India. Now, this particular news mentions certain hurdles to Naga peace. Now, this Naga peace framework is specially related to the Naga Framework Agreement of 2015. So, the challenges in finally implementing the Framework Agreement of 2015 is with respect to number of factors. Number 1, difference in understanding of Greater Nagaland. As according to NSC and IM, this also includes part of Arunachal Pradesh, Assam and Manipur, which goes beyond the Naga inhabited areas. Now, in order to do so, there is a need to reorganize the states of Assam, Manipur, Nagaland as well as Arunachal Pradesh, which is very difficult. The second issue is with respect to the problem of accepting the demand of Greater Nagaland by the Government of India. As already mentioned, that it would require reorganization of states of Northeast, and no states of the Northeast would agree to such a proposal. Further, another challenge is that NSCN wants peaceful settlement outside the purview of Indian Constitution as two separate sovereign entities. Now, this is absolutely unacceptable to the Government of India. Another problem is with respect to demand for a separate Naga flag as well as a separate constitution for Greater Nagaland, which is also creating hurdles to this Naga Framework Agreement. Now, the NSCN people have said that they have specific problem with the governor of Nagaland. Now, this is also another issue which is creating hurdles to Naga peace. Further, there is also difference between various groups, basically between NSC and IM and a conglomeration of 7 rival groups on several issues, which is further creating a stalemate in the execution of the agreement. Also, the fact that NSC and IM had made public the official framework agreement against the wishes of the Government of India. So, all these are creating challenges with respect to the implementation of Framework Agreement of 2015. Now, this topic has been extensively covered in the DNS dated 16th August 2020, where various aspects were covered under the title of Hurdles to Naga Peace. So, for an extensive and elaborate discussion on this particular topic, please go through the DNS dated 16th August 2020, where the issues of hurdles to Naga peace were discussed extensively. Now, this topic gets covered under GS paper 2 as well as GS paper 3, especially with respect to governance as well as security.
With this, we have come to the end of today's discussion. Now, the answers to the questions that we had posed at the start of our discussion have been displayed on your screen. As far as the answers to the question number 4 and question number 7 is concerned, please try to find out the answers on your own by going through the Lokpal and Lokayuktas Act 2013. Now, coming to the question for the day, the answer to the question that was asked in yesterday's DNS was C.